Good evening, everyone, and thank you for another educational series of International Dermatology Education Foundation. Tonight, we're going to be discussing Skin 101. I am Leon Kircik. I'm the president of International Dermatology Education Foundation, as well as a clinical professor of dermatology at Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City, also in Indiana University School of Medicine. My private practice is in Louisville, Kentucky, where I run a lot of the medical dermatology clinical study center. Tonight, my guest is Dr. Jim Del Rosso. He is the research director and principal investigator at JDR Dermatology Research in Las Vegas, Nevada, as well as adjunct clinical professor of dermatology at Troy University in Henderson, Nevada. Also, he is the president of the American Acne and Rosacea Society, and we will have a very interesting chat tonight, Skin 101, understanding the fundamentals of skin barrier physiology. Why is this important for clinicians? Now, but before we do that, I'd like to thank our supporter, Cetaphil, and who made this program possible. Before we begin, if you're having any issues hearing the webinar, you can listen to the presentation using your telephone. Just select phone call in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. At the end of this webinar, a survey will be pop up in your browser and will be emailed to you within 1 to 2 days. We would greatly appreciate if you could fill out this very short survey. If you're having technical issues, please submit your questions in the questions pane on the right-hand side of your screen. Within 1 to 2 days of the webinar, a certificate of attendance will be emailed to you. Again, I think it's good to have questions and to have an interactive session. So please, if you have any questions, submit them using the questions pane on the right-hand side of your screen. Before we go any further, I want to tell you a little bit about my foundation. IDEF is a nonprofit organization whose principal mission is to raise awareness and improve dermatologic care all over the world through education, especially in underserved areas. And throughout the pandemic, we've been broadcasting all over the world, including not only North America, but Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Europe as well. And a couple of the clips from our previous programs here. And also, I hope you're following us at LinkedIn, Instagram, as well as Facebook. So tonight, before we go any further, we have a wonderful program, Understanding the Fundamentals of Skin Barrier Physiology. Why is this important for clinicians? From my good friend, Dr. Jim Del Rosso. Jim, take it over, please.
Thanks a lot, Leon. I appreciate the opportunity. It's always great to see you and to work with Ashley and people involved in the background. And this is actually one of my favorite topics to talk about. We talk about a lot of different things, as does Dr. Kircik. And it's an interesting history. I was about halfway through my career when I was invited to a meeting, and it happened to be with a bunch of stratum corneologists. And I realized I had been in dermatology for so long, and I knew practically nothing about how the skin fundamentally works and how the skin barrier, which is very, very complex, works. And really understanding the fundamentals of that will help you understand why you're recommending certain over-the-counter products or using certain therapies. So that's what I'm going to try to bring to life. There's a lot of technical information in here, and the purpose is to not necessarily know all of that line by line, but to go through why it is important and what you're actually seeing the skin do. This is something that we don't get a lot of background in dermatology. We're getting more than we have in the past, but it's really, really very important. We're recommending cleansers and moisturizers and over-the-counter products all the time, not only therapeutic agents or procedures. It's a good idea to understand actually why they're doing what they're doing and what are the differences between some of them, which we'll get into later. So when do we start? Well, we're starting right now. And then where do we start? It's a very broad, complex topic. And periodically, I'll be stopping and checking in with Dr. Kircik because we worked on this a lot together over the years from an initial article that I wrote years ago. And then we decided to update it. And so we'll start at the beginning. We'll go down the yellow brick road together and walk along and see what we could learn along the way, and try not to leave anything out. And if you jot down questions, we'll get to them later at the end of the presentation. So if you look on the left, this was an article that I had written, and it was published along with Jacqueline Levin, who's done a lot of work in this area. A brilliant lady, practices in Southern California, back in 2011. And I remember when it first came out, I was actually at an advisory board, and Leon was sitting across the table, and I didn't know he was going to do this. And he announced to everyone, I just read this incredible article on the airplane. And he was talking about this article and about how much he had learned about how the stratum corneum worked and how the skin barrier actually worked. And I was very honored by that because, Leon doesn't give out those kind of compliments all the time. And I was very happy to have gotten one. I haven't gotten one since, but I did get one back then. And we sort of got
I'm gonna give you a compliment now, Jim. You're right. I am very stingy on my compliments, but this was the most wonderful article that I learned so much, and I think so did everybody else. Okay, I'm gonna go back
still
around and shut
relevant,
up again.
but there's a lot of new information. But we decided, and we're very thankful for the team at Cetaphil, because this is not a product-driven publication. This is really to understand the fundamentals of skin barrier physiology. It sounds very dry, but there's a lot of it that really has clinical relevance. At the end of the paper, and both these papers are available from JCAD, the Journal of Clinical and Aesthetic Dermatology, which means they're on PubMed. You can access them. You could print out the article at no cost. It's open access. And the article on the right is the new one that was just published in February 2025. And it's interesting because after this second article came out, I received an email from an administrator at UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, who had worked with Dr. Peter Elias for several years. And you see his name as one of the editors on the skin barrier article. And she wrote to me saying that they were very thankful that this article was written, that a lot of the information actually was based on work that Dr. Elias was involved with, and they were very complimentary. So, Leon, I was feeling good about what we did when we got that. I'm not trying to pat us on the back, but it was nice to hear from the people that originated a lot of this that they felt that we did do justice to this particular topic. There's a lot of new clinicians out there. We have a lot of physician assistants and nurse practitioners and even residents and newer dermatologists, and even some of the older ones that maybe a lot of this has passed them by or just haven't thought about it for a while. So it's really to try to bring to light something that's really important for all of us to know. Some of the core references are in the middle, and at the end of the article, there are all the references that this is based on. So let's get started. And I think it's important to think about it this way. When we're in clinical practice, we have so many other things to think about that I didn't really have to think about when I started in dermatology some time ago, or even 10 years ago. I wasn't thinking about how to get done with the EMR, and my staff wasn't sitting at the computer. They were actually talking to the patients because we didn't have electronic medical records. And now we're thinking about what drug we need to get and how to get the prior authorization. And we're actually, our minds are distracted from really the foundations of patient care because of some of the burdens that have been placed on us. But a lot of times we're thinking about what does that patient have and what do we need to give them? What therapy are we going to select or procedure? But typically deciding on what particular medication or medications we're going to give. And the over-the-counter part, especially the skincare part is often, oh, go pick something from the sample cabinet and give the patient, or maybe you give one or two suggestions, but the focus is on the medical therapy. And we really come to recognize how important fundamental skincare is to the overall outcome for the patient. When you look at the clinical studies, and I'll use Cetaphil as an example, Cetaphil products, and that's one of the advantages that Galderma has as a company, is they have a skincare line. So in their studies, they're utilizing Cetaphil skincare as part of the protocol. So it's not only what medication they're getting, it's also what skincare they're getting that's equating to the final result. And in the case of Cetaphil, there have been over 850 studies that have utilized Cetaphil skincare products in over 45,000 patients. And as new studies continue, that number continues to grow, sort of like looking at the numbers of hamburgers at McDonald's. It keeps going on that ticker, increasing. Not quite as much with the Cetaphil numbers, but significantly so, a lot of Cetaphil in clinical studies. So I think it's important when you're with a patient to be selecting the skincare or making recommendations based on what you know. And the more you know, the more fine-tuned you'll be, because the skincare is an integral part of the overall therapeutic regimen. And we've come to realize that. I'd like you to comment on that, Leon, too, because you see a lot of patients and you're involved with giving suggestions. What your take is on that?
So I think this is very important when we treat, regardless what inflammatory condition we are treating, right? Acne, rosacea, atopic derm, even psoriasis, where there is any time epidermal barrier dysfunction, you need to have some what I call adjunctive treatment. And that's basically whatever that moisturizer is, whatever that cleanser is, becomes really important. And most importantly, I think what you mentioned during the clinical trials, originally the acne people, they realized this really well. And they were the first one when we did acne studies. We always ironically use Cetaphil all the time as the cleanser and moisturizer, regardless what company's medication was. That was very interesting. So you're absolutely correct, Jim.
And so the purpose of what we're going to be, the goal really of what we're going to be doing here is to talk about what actually happens physiologically with the skin. And then in certain situations, certain disease states, what's dysfunctional or what's dysregulated that we're trying to address with our therapy. But our skincare can also assist based on what we're trying to correct, right? Because the diseases have some differences in what their barrier dysfunctions are. So let's go over what the skin barrier is. And I remember when this was first brought up, we heard about transepidermal water loss, and then they throw around this term corneometry, which measured the amount of moisture in the skin, and that became our understanding of what the skin barrier is. It's a lot more than that. Okay, when we're thinking about water content within the skin, and it's very important to maintain a certain water content in the epidermis and in the stratum corneum, and there's actually a gradient that allows enzymes to function optimally. And when that gets too low, the enzymes become sluggish. So you can hydrolyze and break down the corneocytes to be shed invisibly. They start to clump and develop scaling and hyperkeratosis. That's only one part of what the epidermal barrier is. There are several components beyond that, which we're going to get to. So many use the term loosely to refer to the permeability barrier, where you're looking at whether you're keeping moisture within the skin. That's only one component. So the epidermal barrier is really a collection of multiple different barriers. But we're going to be focusing on the permeability barrier and the ability to maintain moisture and what's involved in that. Because when there's not enough moisture in the skin, that's when you get the way dry skin and severe dry skin looks, but it also contributes to other components of pathophysiology in different disease states, right? Also, the elasticity of the skin. You know, your skin, if you pinch it, it recoils back into its original shape. If it gets too dry, it becomes rigid. And if you have a shearing force, it cracks. Like the ground in Texas during a drought, you get these fissures and these cracks. Think about heels that become hyperkeratotic or palms and soles where people get fissure. There you're looking at end stage permeability barrier dysfunction when you see that. It took a long time for that to happen. It didn't happen overnight. So visualizing the skin and seeing what's actually happening will help you in terms of managing it. Okay. So this is from the original article, and it's republished in the newer article that talks about the different barriers. These are all the different barriers that collectively make up the epidermal barrier. So we have the permeability barrier that has to do with the lipids within the skin. We hear about ceramides and fatty acids and certain ratios of those, which we'll get into some, and how that actually responds normally, because skin can try to correct itself, right? But sometimes it can't, either because of disease or the exogenous factors overriding the ability to self-repair. And then you start to see the sequelae, like the dryness, the scaling, and the fissuring, which we'll get into. But then there's an antimicrobial barrier, right? Why in atopic dermatitis do patients get more molluscum or to get more colonization with Staph aureus? Because they have a dysfunctional antimicrobial barrier. They're deficient in the normal antimicrobial peptides that we're taking for granted right now that are fighting off organisms that are coming in contact with our skin all the time. We take it for granted because our systems are working. And then there are other barriers like antioxidants that we have, you know, with the pollution level that it is really in several places around the world. Our skin is constantly exposed to oxidizing agents, and there are several other ways that this can happen, obviously from sunlight and other exposures. So if we didn't have antioxidants within the skin, we wouldn't be looking as beautiful as Leon and I look on camera tonight for you, right? And then there is immune response. We have immune responses and also photoprotection, natural photoprotection that can occur. So these are all individual barriers that are collectively working together to maintain the health of the skin. We're going to be focusing on the permeability barrier. So when we look at the stratum corneum and we look at the epidermis, they talk about bricks and mortar, okay? And this is something that several people referred to in the original publication. So you have the corneocytes, the keratinocytes you see here on the left. You have within those keratinocytes that there are components that are humectants. They're naturally there, what's called natural moisturizing factor, and you can increase or decrease that physiologically depending on how much water you need to maintain within the skin. And then there's an envelope around it that's corneified and lipid. There's an interface that's going on with those corneocytes, and they're held together by these corneodesmosomes, these rivets that hold together. In between, there's an intercellular lipid membrane. So it's when we say bricks and mortar, mortar is solid. This is really liquid. It's almost like peanut butter in between. It's more fluid. It's not solid like true bricks and mortar. That lipid membrane is dynamic, and your skin tries to maintain a balance of ceramides, fatty acids, and cholesterols. That was typically described as 3-1-1, but there may be some variability in different races to a certain degree, but you're looking at trying to have a functional balance of the lipids and the humectants within the skin. Now look at table 1 on the right, on the top. These are the different enzymes that are present within the skin that allow us to create the ceramides, the fatty acids, and the cholesterol. Some of this we get exogenously, but these enzymes serve to create and actually make those final lipids that you see in the third column on the right. But these enzymes aren't necessarily working to the same degree in every single person. And that's why some people may have more difficulty. They may be more prone to dry skin because their particular enzyme is not as active as in somebody else. We're not all created equally. Or there may be a disease state. There are disease states that affect steroid sulfatase, so you don't have enough cholesterol in the skin. And you see that with some of the visible changes within the skin. So there's a lot going on. The stratum corneum and the keratinocyte has been described as the most immunologically active organ in the body by several experts in the field. It's not just saran wrap that we used to think it was, the stratum corneum. It's very, very active. But I'm trying to present this in a way that you can start to visualize when there's abnormalities, what the skin is actually going to look like. And that's what we'll be walking through. Okay. So here's what happens. Okay. So you have this barrier, right? On the right, you're seeing all the components of what's called natural moisturizing factor. Natural moisturizing factor is created by a protein in the skin called filaggrin. You may have heard about filaggrin gene mutations in atopic dermatitis. In patients that have that, they can't retain moisture as well because they're deficient in filaggrin, and filaggrin is what breaks down into natural moisturizing factor. What is natural moisturizing factor? That collection of primarily amino acids, but there's other components there. There's urea, there's PCA. You'll see PCA in a lot of skincare products. We're going to be getting into that. The reason why they put that in that product is because they want it to help maintain moisture just the way it does naturally within the skin. Urea, the same thing. Okay. And the free amino acids, we'll get to that because products that are designed to replace natural moisturizing factor will often have arginine and other amino acids. So when you look at the label, that's why those ingredients are there. But what's actually happening as you form keratinocytes from the basal layer moving on up, you see that you start to form the proteins and the lipids. And then at the junction, the stratum granulosum, that's where a lot of the action is happening. That's the Las Vegas strip. That's the strip that you're going down to. Everything else is peripheral around the strip. This is where all the action is happening. And that's where the skin is able to release precursor lipids, increase its production in lipids, and increase natural moisturizing factor by breaking down more filaggrin. So if you go from a very, very humid climate, like in Louisville, Kentucky, or in Houston, or in Miami, and you get off the plane in Las Vegas or in Scottsdale, within a half an hour, you can feel your skin cracking and your nasal mucosa cracking because there's no humidity. In those other places, there's a lot of humidity, so you're getting moisture in the skin from the environment. Suddenly, in Scottsdale or in Las Vegas, you're not. So now the skin has to self-repair and maintain moisture, so it has to produce more natural moisturizing factor and more lipid. So it's working harder because it's trying to maintain the same physiologic amount of water that's going on. You don't know this is happening, but your skin is constantly doing that all the time. So you go to the hotel and you don't have your normal good skin cleanser there, and you're utilizing something that you pull off the shelf, something cheap that they have in the hotel, and your skin doesn't feel as good because they have an alkaline product that's very, very damaging to the stratum corneum, and suddenly your skin doesn't feel the same, and now it has to try to correct itself. And the article will go into it in more detail. I suggest, if you're interested in this, that you go through the article and look at what's actually happening, where this is how the skin can turn up or turn down to self-correct itself depending on what the moisture content is within the skin. Did that make sense, Leon? Is
I
Leon
was,
there?
I am here. I said absolutely. So I know what to do and what not to do when I land in Vegas now. Next time for the fall clinical when I'm there.
Right. So you gotta, it's very important. Bring little small sample size bottles in your travel bags of the good products, because even the high end hotels, they're not necessarily buying the top grade. Some of them do. Now, this is
Yeah.
something we don't talk about. Leon has written about this some and talked about this some that I've seen. And we have people coming in with their products, and you rarely ever hear somebody say, "What's the pH of your product?" Right? The skin pH, the skin maintains what we've talked about for years. There used to be a product called acid mantle years ago, right? The acid mantle of the skin is around pH 4. About 5 to 5.5. It's slightly acidic. That's how everything works normally. When you have alkaline, like soaps that are very alkaline, or cleansers that are very alkaline, or disease states like atopic dermatitis, where the pH is off and becomes more alkaline, balances change. And one of the things that happens is the microbiome becomes less diverse. So you can have greater colonization with staphylococcal organisms like Staph aureus, or even Candida albicans. So when we're born, in the first 3 months of life, our skin pH is alkaline, and that's why you're more prone to get Candida diaperdermatitis in the first few months. You don't see that at 6 to 9 months, typically, unless there's some other reason why that's happening, because after a few months, the skin turns to its normal acid pH, and the microbiome of the skin becomes more diverse, and you don't have that particular problem. But sometimes in certain disease states like atopic dermatitis, sometimes with acne, even rosacea, the pH of the skin turns more alkaline, and the microbiome on the skin changes. Leon, I saw you were going to say something.
Yeah. So one thing, even forget about the cleanser or the soap. You wash your hands with tap water. The pH of tap water is neutral. It's about 7. So right there and then you're changing the pH of the skin, and all those enzymes that work at the acidic pH, they stop working and not doing what they are supposed to do, and really again disrupting that epidermal barrier with the lipids.
Yeah, it's definitely true. And then in neonatal skin and in older skin, we don't have the buffering capacity to sustain the physiologic pH. So that's why utilizing well-formulated cleansers, and especially moisturizers, that are addressing these issues, and not, you know, poorly formulated cleansers and true soaps, right, are very, very alkaline and very irritating to the skin. So we want to really utilize products that are formulated not to significantly alter or disturb the skin pH. But you don't see a lot of talk about that. So this is what happens when the skin pH gets too dry. And there's a listing in here, and the references for all of this is in the article. But you can't synthesize the lipids as well, right? The enzymes don't function as well. The lamellar bodies that actually allow us, when we need to get more lipid because we have to retain water, they don't function as well. Antimicrobial peptides don't work as well. And then there's another interesting phenomena which people don't talk about a lot. So let's say you have somebody, we see people that get very hyperkeratotic xerotic changes on their hands and their feet. They can have them in other places, obviously, where you see it. But what's actually happening there? When you have increased transepidermal water loss that remains unchecked, right? And you're not able to, it's not getting corrected either by the self-repair mechanisms of the skin or by utilizing good moisturization and trying to take care of it with good skincare products. There are cytokines that are released. I call them jump start cytokines. This is a self-repair mechanism where the skin is trying to increase its thickness, increase the epithermal thickness, increase that thickness of the stratum corneum, which is why you see the hyperkeratosis, the rigidity, and the fissuring, because it keeps mounding up. So why is it doing that? You have this highly increased transepidermal water loss. Your skin is losing water. It's not physiologic anymore. It's totally dysregulated. It's trying to thicken itself because if you double the thickness, you reduce the transepidermal water loss to half. So it's trying to correct itself and maintain moisture, but it's doing that by causing hyperkeratosis, right? And you certainly don't want that to happen, but that's what you're seeing the skin actually doing to try to correct itself. And then there are peritogens that are released, which is why dry skin is often itchy, right? And that happens at different degrees in different people. But these changes are all related to an alkaline skin pH, and there can be other problems that are happening too. But this is what will happen with a with not a good control of the skin pH. So now let's move on to certain disease states. So there's a lot of people that have dry skin that don't necessarily have atopic dermatitis or another underlying disease, and they have a certain amount of permeability barrier impairment, meaning that they're losing more water than what they actually need to function at the highest level, where the skin is healthy and smooth and looking perfect, if you will, right? It it's getting dry, it's getting a little scaly, a little bit more rigid. You might see a little bit of fissuring in the skin. Some if it gets more involved, you see the eczema crackle, that people talk about, and can actually lead to just patches of eczematous dermatitis. But when you see that, you know that there's been transepidermal water loss and reduced moisture going on for a while. Once you could see dry skin, it's not just starting there. It's been going on for a while subclinically until you eventually see it. And that's happening because some individuals have a certain amount of decreased enzymatic activity related to whatever their genetics is, and they need more help than someone that doesn't have that problem. They have more transepidermal water loss than their skin can correct with self-correction. So the visibility is really a cumulative effect over time, and it's really important for these people to be utilizing good basic gentle skincare and a good moisturizer. And there's some variabilities in the population because not everybody's exactly the same, created exactly the same. Now, if these people are in situations where they live in a dry climate, like we are out here, where it's harder to overcome, right? It's certainly harder to overcome for atopics. For people that have phenotypic xerosis, they have the same difficulty too, or they're overwashing, washing their hands 20 times a day. That's always going to dry your skin out, right? Overwashing, they're over exfoliating with certain products, they're not utilizing good skincare products, etc. That's going to add to it. Right? Now let's move on to psoriasis. Psoriasis, we're behind in understanding how to address the barrier impairments. The products that we have that we use for skincare for psoriasis help certain components, and it's important that we use them because there is increased transepidermal water loss and they can have some difficulty in maintaining the permeability barrier. But there are some other abnormalities that we haven't quite figured out yet exactly how to address. So some of those are listed here. We do know that there's issues related to the lamellar bodies, which help to release the lipid, some of the keratin expression, the cornified envelope around the cells, etc. There's a variety of different dysfunctions that do contribute to the disease that the products that we have don't necessarily address those to the degree that, let's say, we have products that can address atopic dermatitis, but they do to some degree. And as we get more involved in psoriasis, we'll find out more ways to address that. Right now, we're doing pretty good, but psoriasis is behind atopic dermatitis. But what's interesting, unlike atopic dermatitis, where they have a decrease in ceramide lipids within the skin, that does not appear to be the case in psoriasis. They don't have a decrease in the total content of the ceramides, but the subfractions of not only the ceramides, but also fatty acids. And we forget about fatty acids. It's ceramide, ceramide, ceramide. Fatty acids are so important, and fatty acids are removed by cleansers that are not optimal. It's important to also contribute the fatty acids and also the cholesterol content to that intercellular lipid membrane, not only the ceramides. So there are changes in that membrane that have to do with subfractions of the ceramides and the fatty acids. But still, it's really important to utilize a good moisturizer formulation, a good skin cleanser. And there are some products that have some additives that are more geared for psoriasis, and patients like to see on the label that what they're getting is really targeting the disease that they have. So that is an important component also. So now let's move on to atopic dermatitis. Atopic dermatitis has been the poster child disease state for barrier dysfunction. When we hear barrier dysfunction, atopic dermatitis comes to mind because that's where the majority of the studies have been done. We have so many studies on the barrier impairments, not only the permeability barrier, but the barrier impairments that are present in atopic dermatitis. So we're further ahead with that particular disease, but it's not the only disease state that has barrier impairment. Many of them do. So with atopic dermatitis, there are multiple barrier impairments. I already mentioned the antimicrobial barrier with the decreased antimicrobial peptides, but the permeability barrier dysfunction is very important. So there is a decrease in the total ceramides, but also an abnormality in the ceramides. The chain lengths, the subfractions of the ceramides and even the fatty acids are not the same as what we see in normal skin. So replenishing, okay, and that's why we have agents that are going to replenish ceramides and fatty acids, right? And also natural moisturizing factor, because you can have filaggrin gene mutations and not able to produce the natural moisturizing factor, or the skin is always losing moisture in atopic dermatitis, so it's always trying to self-repair itself in overdrive, but it can't because it has these inherent dysfunctions. That's why skincare is so important on an everyday basis in atopic dermatitis, regardless of whether they're flared or their skin appears normal. If you look on the right, in lesional skin, where they have visible eczematous dermatitis, or just dry skin, or non-lesional skin in a control group, or in that patient that's not necessarily xerotic. Patients that are atopic, when they're flared, their transepidermal water loss is going to be higher, but on the average, they have, even when their skin looks normal, twice the transepidermal water loss as someone that does not have atopic skin. When you're looking at them and their skin looks normal. When they're flared, it goes up even more. So they don't only need the skincare everywhere on their skin, only when they're flared, they need it also in between. And you see on the bottom, it goes over some of the deficiencies in the different subfractions, etc. The bottom line is you want to be utilizing products that are going to replenish your ceramides and also your fatty acids, and even preferably cholesterol, right? So it's important to have both those components on a regular basis. And then rosacea and acne vulgaris, okay? Rosacea, typically is something that patients have sensitive skin. So the reason why we always thought about a barrier impairment was because people's skin is sensitive. It stings, it burns, so there must be something wrong. And we do know that they have problems, especially when they're more flared, with increased transepidermal water loss. There have been studies that have been done. The skin pH becomes more alkaline. Their skin can't maintain the hydration, so they are more prone to having stinging and burning from the exogenous environment, and they typically have what's called sensitive skin, that even when they're not flared, their skin could be more sensitive. So you see on the bottom, and this could be whether they have papules or pustules or not. They may just have the background erythema without the papules and pustules. These patients do need proper skin care, and we have a lot of data with therapies that we use, things like azelaic acid, or really any of the agents that you use, um, you know, that we utilize with rosacea. Utilizing good skincare mitigates, lessens any sensitivity that you can get from the topical product. So the skincare in rosacea, we have a lot of data to show that's extremely important. Acne, Acne is very interesting because we have very little data on what the actual inherent stratum corneum permeability barrier is like in acne. We think there might be some dysfunction, but we don't have a lot of data to know exactly what that is. But we know when these patients have acne present, they do have increased transepidermal water loss. They do show some reduction in ceramides and other components. So we want to replenish that. But on top of that, so many of the topical products we use create irritation of the skin. Topical retinoids, some more than others, or some vehicles more than others, but they all cause a certain amount of barrier impairment and discohesion of the cells. Benzoyl peroxide, certain vehicle formulations. So skincare is extremely important, as is antioxidant effect. And we have a lot of data with our studies that proper skincare will help patients with acne have greater improvement than if they're not using proper skincare. So selecting skincare is going to be important in all these disease states, and there may be reasons why you would use one agent versus another. So at this point, Leon, I'm going to ask you to put on your camera because we're going to have a little bit of fun. Okay. We're going to get into the next part of it where, okay, big shot, Del Rosso and Kircik, that's great. But where are we now? How are we going to pick out what product we're going to use? You go to a Sephora store and look at all the products there. I mean, how to, or even a pharmacy, the skincare shelves, right? There's more than anybody's going to be able to wrap their head around. So we have to think about products that have to choose from. And some people are into this more. They get into more of the high-end cosmeceuticals, but really core fundamental skincare, if you know that and nothing more than that, you're going to do very well in taking care of your patients. And we're fortunate that we have companies like Galderma and others that bring us excellent skincare products. Cetaphil is with us here tonight. There are other brands. We're not going to say here that there's only one company that has really good skincare products. It's good to become familiar with them. But what I like to do, Leon, is how do we optimize the skincare? And when we're looking at products, we have to be sure that they have some fundamental core ingredients, right? So there are three core ingredients, right? There are occlusives, humectants, and emollients. Occlusives, petrolatum is the simplest occlusive we could think of. It forms a film on the surface. It blocks the water from leaving. But there are other agents that could be used for occlusive effect. Even some emollients like stearyl alcohol and cetyl alcohol that are in Cetaphil. That's where the name Cetaphil came from. And sometimes you'll see it, stearyl alcohol, they combine them together and they use that as a single ingredient in the products. They can give occlusivity. But the humectants, if the humectants are going to be really important, because if you don't have sitting in that stratum corneum agents that are going to hold the water in, it's going to get evaporated out and it's going to be gone. That's why drinking more water, people go, I drink water all the time, my skin's still dry. Well, you're not retaining it with good humectants. And the principal humectants, glycerol, glycerin, is something that you're going to see in a lot of products. It's actually a staple in a lot of the Galderma products, but you'll see it combined with other agents. You'll see hyaluronic acid in there. That is a natural humectant that binds water. Urea, which is part of natural moisturizing factor. Sodium pyrrolidine carboxylic acid, PCA, part of natural moisturizing factor, is often in many of the products. And panthenol. Panthenol is another agent that has a lot of different properties, which we'll get into in a little bit. That it, the reason why they have multiple ones, if you put too much glycerol in, what happens? The product's sticky and messy. So that's why a lot of times you'll see combinations of agents that are doing the same thing. Because if you put in too much of one agent, it may change the consistency of the formulation so it's not elegant anymore, or it may be at a level that's irritating. And then the emollients are what makes it feel good. And there are several different ones that have different properties. And then we get to the products that replenish, right? We're gonna go through a few examples, Leon. That's why I pulled you back in. That you have other special additives in there, like components of natural moisturizing factor, niacinamide, and other agents to add on top of the other three. So the goal is to sustain that healthy function and the appearance of the skin so it looks as beautiful as Dr. Kircik's face does on camera right now. That's what our goal is. So Leon, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to discuss two things. Why do we need the occlusive and the humectants from a very, very practical perspective? So assume you have dry skin. Assume that epidermal barrier is dysfunctional. You put the Vaseline on. It's occlusive. What are you occluding? The dry skin. There is absolutely nothing to occlude. So just having an occlusive moisturizer such as Vaseline is not gonna do it. Let's take a humectant. You have a dry skin, epidermal barrier is dysfunctional. You take the humectants. Humectants are great. They basically attract the humidity and the water from the bottom layer of the skin, actually from inside, but also from outside. But if you have a impaired barrier, the humidity is gonna come and it's gonna evaporate as fast as it's gonna come, and even it's gonna take more water with itself. So now you're helping even what you have to evaporate faster than ever.
Right.
So humectants alone is not gonna cut it. And that's why in the old days, when people had atopic derm, they said, don't take a shower, don't take a bath, because it's gonna make it worse. So you need both. You need the humectant to get the water humidity into the stratum corneum. Then you need the occlusive, the Vaseline, to occlude that humidity. That's why we tell our patients, when you take the bath or when you take the shower, air dry yourself, not even towel dry it. While your skin is wet, apply that Vaseline or the occlusive to occlude that moisture into the stratum corneum. So the bottom line is having both ingredients, occlusive, whatever those ingredients are, occlusive or the humectant, is a must.
You need both, and very well said. And the emollients. So the way I think about it, why is it that my grandmother always made the spaghetti sauce better than my mother and my sister, or even my uncles that were pretty good cooks, right? Mostly the women in the family dominated the kitchen, but we had some uncles that were in there cooking. But why was my grandmother always the best? They were using the same things. There are some formulators that are just artists at putting formulations together. And there's so many things here, but they know how to, just like my grandmother would just taste the spaghetti sauce and she didn't measure anything. She just knew what to add. I mean, it's the same sort of thing. And when they're putting a product together to get that final product that feels good, it's going to be mixing and matching a lot of these components. So we're coming to the end, but I want to give as an example. I'm going to use a couple of Galderma products as an example as to why you might use one versus the other. So we have two skin cleanser products, classic products. We have the daily facial cleanser and we have the gentle skin cleanser. And you're looking there and you see both of those samples. Why are you going to pull one versus the other? Well, actually, you can pull either one, basically for the core care, but there are some ingredient differences that can be very important. The daily facial cleanser, because it's being used on the face, it contains panthenol. That's one of the often a staple product that Galderma and other companies use. Panthenol is vitamin B5. So you're telling a patient, there's some vitamins in here for your skin. They're going to want to hear that. Certainly niacinamide would add to that. Very small, low molecular weight, penetrates the skin very well, also has humectant properties, and it works very well with glycerol. It also increases lipid synthesis and fatty acid biosynthesis. So it has a lot of factors that it does. Also, when you have surfactants that are irritating, both panthenol and niacinamide reduce the irritation of those other products, including retinoids. So there's good reasons why we have those in a cleanser, certainly in a moisturizer. But a big difference between the facial cleanser and the gentle skin cleanser is the facial cleanser has cocamidopropylbetaine as a surfactant, right? Cocamidopropylbetaine is what made No More Tears, No More Tears. If it gets in the eyes, it's user friendly for the eye. But some people have betaine allergy. So if they do, then that person would be better to use the gentle skin cleanser. But a lot of the other components, the glycerin, the panthenol, even niacinamide is in there. Niacinamide is vitamin B3 that increases lip synthesis. It increases transepidermal water loss. It also decreases erythema in some patients. And it's another vitamin. So when you look at there's reasons why these products are in there, but there is a difference where you might choose one versus the other. Any comments on that, Leon?
Oh, it's all, I agree 100%.
So sometimes it's important just to get a little bit more familiar with the products that you recommend frequently, looking on the label and just looking up, why is that here? Let's move to a moisturizer and we'll end up. The old standby Cetaphil moisturizing cream in that tub jar that we've had for a long time. Very interesting formulation, because a lot of times we've been forced to use that in studies, because in some studies of atopic dermatitis, they won't even let us use something that has, a ceramide in it. This is a non-ceramide containing moisturizer that is acrylate based. So that acrylate polymer is really the core, and it also contains glycerin, it contains dimethicone, which is very helpful as an emollient. It has some other components in there. It has vitamin E for antioxidant effect, and has petrolatum, some occlusivity, though it's not an ointment, it's a cream, and glycerin. So it's a well-formulated core moisturizer. But then you have Restoraderm, which is formulated as somewhat of a therapeutic moisturizer for atopic dermatitis. So how is this different? The Restoraderm Soothing Moisturizer, it contains other components. So it does have ceramides, it has niacinamide, it has certain oils in it, like sunflower oil. It has shea butter. What is shea butter? Shea butter is a collection of 5 fatty acids, including linoleic acid. So it's helping you replace not only the ceramides, but the fatty acids, in addition to having the glycerin and some of the other components we talked about. The cetyl alcohol and stearyl alcohol are emollients that add to some of the occlusivity that help retain the moisture. So yes, they're both moisturizers, but they have components that you may want to select one as just a basic moisturizer in general versus something that's targeted for a patient with a certain disease state. So those are just some examples where you're actually selecting based on specific ingredients. Leon, before we end up, any comments
So
there?
at the risk of going overtime, I'm gonna add, going back to my memory, Cetaphil moisturizing cream, right? The good old one that came in a jar, was used as a vehicle for a topical rosacea drug.
But
Right, Jim?
absolutely.
So, and
Ivermectin.
imagine
It was the core of
ivermectin,
ivermectin.
exactly.
Yeah.
And imagine how sensitive is the rosacea skin, and how well did these patients do actually in that study. I remember I was part of that study. So it's amazing what a good vehicle can do. And I'm gonna end this conversation with saying vehicles matter. So I thank you so much, Jim. It was a great program. I hope everybody enjoyed it and learned a lot. Every time I listen to you, I learn something. So I thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Have a good evening. I want to thank our sponsor again, Cetaphil today. And I want to tell you about our next program now that we're done with the Cetaphil. It's going to be Dr. Barry Raznick on defining the difference for hidradenitis suppurativa, sunrise and sunshine, the latest chapter in Cosentyx story. And hopefully I'll see you on March 25th, Tuesday, 7 p.m. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone.
Thank
Thank you
you.
again, Jim.
If
Bye-bye.
anybody has any questions, because we went a little long, just send them and we'll try to get back to you. Thank you.
Absolutely.